All right, welcome back to the podcast, everybody. In this episode, we have special guest Andrew Bogut. Andrew is a Croatian-Australian former professional basketball player who, among other accolades, was the first pick in the 2005 NBA draft, 2011 blocks leader, and a 2015 NBA champion. In this episode, we're going to learn about his Croatian heritage, professional career, and what he's up to nowadays. Andrew, thanks for coming on the podcast.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. It's really awesome to have you on. I just had Dino Raja on a few weeks ago. And so that was like my first big, celebrity to get on the podcast, especially in the basketball world. And now to have you on here as well. I mean, I'm super excited to hear from you and talk to you. Can you tell us a little bit about your Croatian heritage? I know you were born in Melbourne, but the Croatian.
Yeah, born in Melbourne. Both my parents migrated to Australia in the 70s. And yeah, my mother's from Karlovac, dad's from Osijek. So my grandparents were looking to, get out of Croatia at some point. Growing up in the 40s, 50s, 60s was not the most kind of prosperous time in Croatia's history with everything going on. There was every other year there was some conflict or some wars or something going on. And you had the World War before that. So they were, my grandfather was commuting to Germany a lot, working over there and then coming home. Then one of our cousins moved to Australia. My father and grandparents took a ship out to Australia, and they thought that they would remain in Australia. They then had second thoughts, went back on a boat again to Croatia for a year odd, and then realized they made a mistake and came back to Australia again on a ship. So my dad spent a lot of time on those long voyages internationally that the ships used to take. And yeah, then my sister was born in 1979 and I was born in 1984, and we're first generation Australians. But I guess the heritage thing that I always tell people was, I grew up in Australia and was born in Australia, but I was raised Croatian. Our house and our home was basically Croatia. Outside of that, it was Australia, but in our home, it was Croatian music, Croatian food. It was Croatian items on the walls, art. My grandparents, whenever they babysat, spoke strictly in Croatian. So it was kind of like, it was pretty cool. Back then, as a kid, you're kind of, I wouldn't say embarrassed by it, but you're like, everyone else is speaking, English and Australian, and kind of like, you're trying to fit in as a young kid. But when you look back as an adult, it was awesome because I got to learn the language basically without going to school for the most part. You get to learn about customs, ideals, all that kind of stuff. And when I got to visit Croatia later on in my life, the transition was pretty easy for me.
So do you feel more like you were Croatian rather than Australian when you were, a kid growing up there?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Look, I'm still very proud of being Australian and what Australia has provided to our family. Leaving Croatia was hard, very hard for my grandparents. Croatians, obviously, as we know, are very proud people, very sentimental people, and very family orientated. So to get up and leave and take that risk, mainly economic and mainly for a better life for their family, was tough. So I consider myself both. I think a lot of my ideals and hard-headedness comes from Croatian side, and I think that's a good thing at times, and I'm also very proud of the fact that Australia's provided a lot for myself and our family.
Yeah, it's nice to have that sort of dual identity for myself as well, in the U.S. as well as being Croatian. I feel that sort of dual identity of being both. You mentioned your dad taking, what was that, 3 trips there, back, and there again?
There, back, yeah. So it would have been 3 trips essentially, yeah.
That's crazy. Well, that must take what, almost a month, at 3 weeks, 3
I was
weeks.
more, yeah. It was months, yeah. I think it was 8 odd weeks. I think, if I remember correctly, it was 6 to 8 weeks. So basically a third of the year was spent on a boat for 3 years of his life. So pretty interesting.
That's crazy. I'm sure he's told tons of stories about that and about the trips like that.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, making friends on the ship, playing table tennis, all those kinds of things. They definitely weren't the ships they are today, the luxury cruise liners they have. It was pretty bare bones, but just being restricted to the boat for, that long would be pretty hard, I think, even for myself to do these days. You'd find your way, obviously, and adapt, but yeah, after knowing how long it was and how much time it took then to do it 2 more times, it's pretty painful.
Yeah, that's nuts. A different time then, especially now knowing that you can take an airplane, less than a day, go from one place to another.
Exactly. Yeah.
Andrew, can you tell us a little bit about, your childhood growing up and sort of when did you start getting into basketball?
Yeah, growing up, I didn't play I didn't start basketball until kind of not late, but later for most athletes. I did gymnastics first, funnily enough, because my sister was older. She did gymnastics, so I kind of, parents were like, it's just easier to take them both to the same spot. Maybe they'll both like it. I hated that. I did that for about a year, and I hated it. I'm more of a ball sports type guy, so after that, I did a little bit of taekwondo. And then I did some Australian rules football, so our code of football here in Australia, and that's outdoors in the winter, so very muddy, very, very dirty sport. Parents were okay with it, but didn't love it. And then I just naturally just started watching basketball on TV as a 6, 7, 8 year old, and ended up loving basketball. And it was kind of the in thing here at the time in Australia in the 90s. The NBA was booming. And then I asked my parents if I could play basketball, and they kind of said, look, you've changed sports 3 times now. This will be your fourth. If you change sports one more time, that's fine, but that's it. There's no more a year into that sport saying, oh, I'm sick of this now, I'm going to go to the other sport, or I want to try something else. It was like, I think I was about 9 years old at the time. They said, if you choose it, this is it. There's no more. Those expensive uniforms, fees, all that kind of stuff's very expensive, at least in Australia, to play junior sport. And I said, cool, yeah, I love basketball. And that was kind of how I got into it. My father was a mechanic, essentially, and there was a hoop that was drilled into the wall outside of his workshop that was from a neighboring Smash Repairs panel beater shop. So they used to use this ring to hang, parts that they'd stripped from cars and painted. So they used to hang that up on the ring to dry in the sun, right? And that was the first hoop I started throwing a ball through. So it's kind of surreal, like the story of how it all went, and then took it up competitively and never really looked back.
Wow, that's crazy. Starting from that and then going to the NBA, years later. Who were sort of some of your idols, or what teams were you following when you first started watching basketball?
Well, being Croatian descent, for me, it was Tony Kukoc, mainly because I was a very similar body type to him, really skinny and lanky as a young kid, and similar kind of games as a young kid. So he was a guy I looked up to, and obviously the Croatian heritage helped. Obviously, Dražen, being Croatian descent, everyone kind of loved what he was about. I mean, he passed when I was only 7, 8 years old, so I didn't get to see a lot of him, especially with technology back then. You couldn't really see those games in Australia. Luke Longley was a guy from Australia that was really the only Australian player that was a mainstay in the NBA at that period. There wasn't many guys that got over there and actually stayed for multiple years. There was guys that went over for a year or two and didn't make it and came back. Luke was kind of the mainstay. So those 3 guys. I mean, I was a Bulls fan because of Tony and Jordan and all that kind of stuff as well. So I enjoyed watching them. So, but yeah, the 90s was a really fun time to be a basketball fan.
Yeah, well, yeah, Tony Kukoc and Dražen Petrovic, 2 legends, of course. Did you ever get to meet up with Tony once you started?
I played with Tony. So yeah,
Wow,
I mean,
really?
yeah, it was so my yeah, really like crazy surreal moment. My rookie year with the Milwaukee Bucks, Tony was playing for the Bucks at the time and was a free agent going into my rookie year, and they brought him back on a 1-year deal to kind of be a veteran for me, and to think that I was wearing his jersey as a young kid. Like literally, there's a photo from 2003 when I visited Croatia after we won the World Junior Championship with Australia. We played that in Greece, and I'd never been to Croatia, so I thought, I'm in Greece, I might as well, go back to Croatia. It was the first time my father and mother had been back since they migrated to Australia. So we went to Croatia, and I did a bunch of tours. I met Drazen's mother and father, and I went to the museum, and there's a photo of me at Drazen's grave with the Tony Kukoc #7 Milwaukee Bucks jersey on. This is before I was, even close to being drafted. And then 2 years later, I get drafted by the Bucks, and I'm playing with Tony. So in fact, he even threw me I hit a game winner in my rookie year, and with 0 0.7 seconds left against the Spurs, and Tony was the one that threw the assist from the sideline. So full circle of the way life works, and it was really cool to be playing with one of the, Tony wasn't at his best then. He was 30, in his mid to late 30s and body breaking down, but it was just awesome to be around one of the legends of not only Croatian basketball but European and American basketball in general.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm sorry to say I didn't realize he had played that long. I didn't even realize he was on the Bucks. I'm only 26 years old, so that was, I guess I was about 10 or 11 when that happened.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. So he was sort of your mentor on the team, that they brought him to sort of show you the ropes and everything for your rookie year.
Yeah, obviously it was a no-brainer for them. It brought him on the vet minimum. So they knew my Croatian descent, and they knew that he was Croatian. They knew that I idolized him to an extent. So it made sense. And it was like I said, it was really, really cool to be able to sit on a plane with him and talk. And we used to go out to eat lunch on the road together, or before the games or after the games. And, it was good.
That's awesome. Going back to, well, let's talk about the draft. I mean, you were drafted in 2005 to the NBA. And even before the draft, can you tell us, sort of when you realized that, like, okay, I'm going to be a professional basketball player? Was that like in high school? Was that in college? Even before? Did you have your sights set on that?
Yeah, I always wanted to be, but you never know. Like, you hear whenever you say that as a kid, people tell you like, well, the stats are really super low that you're going to make it, the chances, the probability, all that kind of stuff. So I always thought it was achievable at some capacity. Playing, it didn't matter if I was playing in the middle of nowhere for money, as long as it was professional. And then, I think probably the year before I went to college, I really, really, like, my game just grew insanely. I just got so much better. I made so much strides in like a 9-month period in 2002 and 3, kind of towards the end of 2002 to mid 2003, that I go to the World Cup in Greece under 19s. I win the MVP. We win the first ever medal for Australia in an international tournament at the men's level at under 19s. So once that happened, I was like, I've got a legit chance now. Like, a bare minimum for me is going to be playing professionally in Australia. That's kind of the low bar. Mid would be, Europe, EuroLeague, and top would be NBA. I still didn't know about the NBA and the whole process, because, like I said, Luke Longley was really the only Australian that managed to solidify himself from Australia. So that was a time where a lot of international guys were still starting to get through the cracks as being, first round picks, but it was still kind of, we don't know, are they soft, are they this, are they that? So, and then, had a great 2 years in college, and then was on draft boards. The closer and closer I got towards the end of my college career, the higher and higher I got on draft boards. And then within probably the last month or two in Utah, I knew that I was going to be drafted at some point. And then it kind of went second round, early second, late first. The further and further we got, it ended up being, you got to be a top 5 pick to a top 3 pick to a number 1 pick. So it kind of, it all happened real quickly. Like, it happened, like I said, I was kind of a relative unknown in the basketball world in 2002. And then by 2005, I was the number 1 pick.
Yeah, you were also, I believe, the first Australian to go first in the NBA draft also.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So, that was kind of the pressure. Like, it was like, no one's ever done this before. Luke, I think it was the 12th or 13th pick. It was 8th. I think it was 8th pick. So yeah, to even crack the top 5, it was really cool.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, if you put it in today's perspective, like, it's a huge deal. The NBA draft is a huge deal. Whoever goes first, you're all over social media. Everyone knows about you. You're basically instantly famous. I mean, of course, if you weren't before, with the career you put up. What was it like for you when you got that, when you were selected first? Did you feel like all of a sudden, oh, like, I'm a star? Are people recognizing you? What was that sort of transition from college into a first round pick? You're in the NBA.
Yeah, it's all a learning process. It's all fresh and foreign. Like, no matter what people tell you, people are going to tell you, do this, do that, do this for your money, do this with your friends, do this with your family. Like, it ends up being, you got to do it, and you got to make mistakes along the way. You figure out what works for you and what doesn't. And yeah, like, for me, it was an adjustment period. It goes from being relatively unknown, and you realize the beauty being the beauty in sometimes being unknown, because you just go to get groceries and people want to stop and talk to you, which is fair enough, but at times you're in a rush, you have an appointment, you're feeling sick or whatever, or you're not looking your best, and everyone kind of knows who you are. You go out for a drink and people take a photo of it and say you're an alcoholic. You go out, you know what I mean? Like, there's all these things that come along with that, and that's just something you got to expect, being in the public eye, and that's the unfortunate reality. So throughout my career, I navigated how I handled that, and towards the mid to late, I wouldn't say I was a hermit, but I just was very careful strategically of where I went and what I did, because I'd seen countless numbers of teammates and countless numbers of people in the league get taken for a ride, get in trouble, do something stupid, have one moment of letting their guard down and not thinking through something, and then it can change your career. So I was in a few of those circumstances throughout my career, and I thankfully handled them pretty well and didn't really cause too much trouble as far as that went. So I was pretty lucky and steady-headed. But look, at the end of the day, no one can prepare you for it. It's something that you've got to navigate your own and figure out along the way. And you definitely see the pros and cons in a lot of different people. And unfortunately, on the negative side, is human nature comes out with a lot of people close to you once they know how much money you're making, and you gotta take that in stride, and can hurt at times, but that's just the reality of what you deal with.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think, in a situation like that, like, oh, you're famous, life is easy, life is great. But yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of things that you don't really think about that, you sort of have to be careful of. Even just, I mean, you're how tall are you? 7 foot even, or?
Yeah, 7 foot.
Even just size wise, going out in public, I mean, I'm sure people are noticing you, even if they don't immediately recognize who you are. So, going anywhere, you're basically always in the public eye, I guess, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I can't hide. I can't. Teammates of mine could put a hat on and blend in with the crowd, and unfortunately, I'm 7 foot. So even if people don't know who you are, they are intrigued, and they might Google or they might hear someone say your name, and then they find out who you are. People that have no idea about basketball. So it's just one of the things you got to deal with.
Mm-hmm. So your first couple of years in the NBA, looking back on your career, how would you say, when you were with the Bucks, how were those years with the Bucks? I mean, you were a huge defensive presence, in particular blocks was sort of that's what you were best at compared to other players. 2011, you had the most blocks. Sort of in retrospect, how were those years with the Bucks?
Yeah, that was interesting. Look, the club was in a period that there wasn't a whole lot of success in the 2000s. It was a lot of rebuilding. I guess the frustrating thing for when I was in Milwaukee was we just couldn't put together a stable roster. We kind of changed. Our roster was gutted almost every season. We had a lot of guys. It was kind of the joke around the league was it was a revolving door of a franchise. So if you got a player, they'd come through the turnstile, and then by the end of the season they'd be out of the turnstile. And you can't build long-term success or any kind of success like that. It's very, very hard to do. So we had a few successful years, kind of the midpoint, and then once again, like, we had a good year, and then the next season, there's 7-8 new players again on the roster. So that was a little frustrating, just to get a bit of stability. Which then, going to Golden State after that, that's when I was finally part of a club that had stability. Even though they weren't good when I first got there, built into a stable club, and obviously they're still one of the most dominant forces in the NBA 10 years later. So, but Milwaukee was really good for me as far as being a small market, small town USA. I think that fit my personality much better than going to Los Angeles or New York. I think that would have been a whole different ball game for me, and I enjoyed my time there. Everything but the weather. I mean, the weather's brutal in Milwaukee. Wasn't used to those kind of temperatures below zero. But as far as a city and a town, it was a part of my life where I kind of grew from a boy to a man. So it's very, very sentimental to me. It'll always have a special place in my heart, and I look forward to getting back there one day.
You mentioned the Warriors, Golden State, with whom you won a championship in 2015. What was different with that team, compared to the other teams? Where this championship team, what was different on the Warriors?
Look, we had a good mix of young talent, and Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Harrison Barnes. We had a good mix of veterans, myself and Iguodala and David Lee. And I think the roster was just put together very, very well. A bit of luck goes into that. Like, GMs and coaches will tell you sometimes it's luck. You might not realize that a guy is actually a good person, good guy to have in a group and can play and fits a role well or whatever. But I think one of the most important things was we had just good people in that locker room. That's half the battle in professional sports is having players that I guess have kind of got over themselves. Which, look, every young player is trying to solidify themselves and show that they can do more than they're being allowed to or more than their role is. In Golden State, we had players that I was kind of a number one, number two option with Milwaukee for a number of years. Andre Iguodala was a number one, number two option for a few of his teams. David Lee the same. So we were all in Golden State in the mid part of our careers, and we were like, you know what, like we're okay playing a fourth, fifth role. We're okay being a role player to step and play. And I think we had a lot of guys accept those roles, and that's probably the hardest part for coaching in the NBA is you could have a team of stars, 5 players, but they can't all score 30. They can't all put up their averages. Someone's got to take a back seat to someone else. And that's when problems usually arise. We didn't really have those problems. There was some teething stuff with guys that obviously went from 35 minutes to 20, and that's an adjustment. But at the end of the day, when you're winning games, you can't complain too much because other guys are going to be like, well, what do you want, man? We're winning. We've got a chance to compete for a championship. And it kind of came together quick. Like it was a team that was a laughing stock of a franchise 3 or 4 years previously, before the championship. So, 2006, 7, 8, they had one good year in 08, and then all the other years were pretty poor, to get to a position where they're probably the most stable franchise in the NBA right now as far as consistency goes over the last decade is a testament to what they've built and the people that they've recruited and had involved with the club.
So it sounds like you guys really played as, a team and had chemistry. And I know Steve Kerr gets a lot of praise for that. Mark Jackson also with that team put in a lot of work before Steve Kerr came, I believe. Do you think Steve Kerr is he really that great of a coach that he's able to do things, these type of things with the Warriors and make them all a team? Or do you think also those players, naturally are getting along and work well together?
Oh, it's definitely a mix of both. I don't think Steve's reinvented the wheel, if anything, and he'll be the first one to tell you that. And I don't think it's just solely player driven. I think it's a balance. And you look at how hard it is to coach today. You look at what happened with Steve Nash in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn, arguably one of the most talented rosters in the league, and they get off to a horrible start under Steve Nash. So that just tells you that it definitely matters with coaching to an extent, but it also matters with players. And I think Steve did a great job of having player input, allowing player input, but also putting his foot down when he needed to. And, Steve simplified things, but also demanded some discipline on other things. We were a real high turnover team before Steve got involved. The Warriors still kind of can have high turnover games, but he had an emphasis on not turning the ball over and really, really, push that on us. But Steve and most smart NBA coaches will tell you it's not about the game's changed the last 10, 15 years. It's not about traditional coaching, about what you can write on a whiteboard and what plays and what system you can implement. It's people management and personality management, and that's 90% of it. Like if you could be a genius, you could be Red Auerbach or Pat Riley or Phil Jackson and have the best plays in the world and just be an unbelievable basketball Mozart. But if you don't have an element of communication and understanding and back and forth, and you can relate to the players, you're going to get fired. I don't care who you are. That's just the reality of it. And that's probably not the right balance. I think it should be 50-50, but it's really swayed towards if your star players aren't happy with you, even if you're winning, you're gone. Simple as that. And that's where Steve understands that, you got to have relationships with every player. Every player's personality is different. Like I can yell at that guy over there and he's going to respond, but that guy I probably need to go with a different tactic or put my arm around him every now and then. That guy doesn't like to be spoken to either way, so we'll just give him a little bit of feedback. This guy responds better to film video. We'll get with a video coach and showing him mistakes he's making. So you got to understand your players in that aspect, and I think Steve's number one attribute is that.
So you really have to understand and manage the players' personalities then.
100%.
Andrew, you had a couple of freak injuries, throughout your career that really hampered your career, playing wise, time wise. You're having to sit out just for things. maybe it hurts you to think about, but when you hung on the rim and fell on your arm, are those things that still affect you physically today? Like, are you feeling, effects from all the wear and tear of playing basketball?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's the same as anyone else. Even without the major injuries, you're always going to retire with issues with your hips or your back or your knees or your ankles. I mean, it's a brutal sport. It's full contact, hard surface. So yeah, I mean, I have to work out to this day, and thankfully, nothing's bothering me to a point where I'm incapable of doing what I want to do on a daily basis. That's probably the most important thing, and probably the main reason why I retired when I did. I didn't retire early. I didn't retire late. I kind of was 35 years old when I retired. And that was the main driver. I didn't want to get to a point where I play an extra year or two and that puts so much toll on my body that, at 40, I'm struggling to be able to play with the kids or go and do whatever I want to do. So I'm still super active, playing with the kids a lot, swimming, doing all those different things. And yeah, I have to work out. That's the answer. Like I can't, it's not like I've retired and can now stay out of the gym. I gotta, go and lift weights and do some core work. And I still go see a physio once a week to make sure that the body's kind of like it's probably now like an old vintage car, right? You got to just make sure that every now and then it gets a service and probably gets a bit more love than the new cars. And that's kind of how I treat my body. So touch wood, to this point, it's been great. Had a few surgeries when I retired, got some things fixed that I needed to get fixed that were lingering throughout my career, and haven't really had too much of an issue since then, thankfully. But I'm sure when I'm 60, 70 years old, there'll be, the elbow is probably the biggest one. The elbow and the ankle are probably being joints. They're probably the two biggest ones that I just got to make sure I keep maintaining and be careful.
Well, yeah, hopefully technology by then is even more advanced that, injuries will be even easier to
100%.
heal from, hopefully. I was just thinking, because you mentioned how Tony Kukoc was your mentor, for that first season. And I wanted to ask about Ivica Zubac, because you were sort of in that same role of Kukoc, but for Zubac, you were with him. I guess that was his rookie year on the Lakers.
Second year, I think, yeah.
Second year. What was that like? I read that you would explain a couple things in Croatian to him, just when things were easier to understand in his native language, and were you sort of showing him the ropes? Did you feel like, oh man, I'm doing what Tony Kukoc was doing for me?
Yeah, somewhat. Look, I think it's always nice when you have someone that can speak your native tongue on a team. So it was the first time in his NBA career that he probably had that, and just trying to help him. I mean, he was going to be a great player in the NBA, and I think he was in a transition period. The Lakers weren't doing too well throughout his career there. So he was kind of head was spinning at times, like, what's going on here? We're not winning, we're not playing well. So just trying to help him through that. And I think the biggest thing where I helped him with was just defensively, just understanding how big and strong he is and how he can really affect the game in the paint. So we spent a fair bit of time together. I was only there for 4 or 5 months, but we spent a fair bit of time together, and we still talk to this day. We still text back and forth every now and then, and he's a great kid. Like, I really got a lot of time for Ivica, and he's kind of, done really well with his body of work coming from Europe and then coming over to the NBA and now solidifying a really important role for the Clippers. So I've really enjoyed continuing to watch his journey, and hopefully get a championship in the next couple of years.
Hopefully, yeah, he's really progressed very well as a player year after year. Andrew, sort of going back to Croatia a little bit, how often do you go back to visit now, or if at all, in recent years?
Yeah, no, I had an apartment. Had an apartment on the island of Pag in Novaya. I bought that in 2009. I just sold it pre-COVID, luckily, because I couldn't go back there anyway. I just thought we just had kids, and I knew we wouldn't travel to Croatia for a couple of years with the kids, because that's just a nightmare to get on a long flight with 6-month-old and a 2-year-old. So I thought I'll sell that and then eventually get something else somewhere else. And then COVID hit, so I haven't been back since, I think it's been almost 4 years now since I've been back. And I went every year from 2009. I went every year for at least 2 to 3 weeks, and a couple of off seasons I spent 2 months there. So Novaya had a basketball gym, so I familiarized myself with the locals there, and I used to work out there on the island. Found a weight room, all that kind of stuff. So I established a nice little routine. But then, with COVID, I haven't had an opportunity to go back, and I'm actually planning a trip this June. So I have a lot of family still in Croatia, and my auntie and uncle live there. my goddaughter as well. So we haven't seen them for a number of years. So we're looking forward to going back hopefully in June.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, yeah, if you were in Australia, you weren't even able to go anywhere in the last couple of years with COVID and everything, right? Like the
Yeah, Australia and the EU had restrictions, and then it was just the last thing I wanted to do was, it was hard enough to travel within Australia at that point. We had some crazy restrictions, so the last thing I wanted to do was travel around the world and get stuck somewhere, then not be able to get back. Australia was just crazily stupid with how they went with even residents returning back. You'd have to go through a 14-day quarantine times in a hotel if you were allowed back in the country. There were waits of up to 6-7 months to get back in the country at times. So we just thought, you know what, like let's just stay in Australia until this all kind of dies down a little bit, till travel's a bit more kind of consistent, and we know we're not going to get locked down somewhere. So the last thing you want to do is be traveling out of a suitcase with two young children and be stuck in, Croatia's not the worst place to be stuck in, but it's not somewhere where we'd have things to be able to live permanently on the fly, right? It's more of a holiday. So we didn't want to take that risk, and it ended up being the right decision because Australia was just every other day they'd be changing decisions and rules and coin flipping on things. So, but yeah, now it seems like we've somewhat passed all that. And yeah, I look forward to putting a trip together in June and get back in the Mediterranean and get back in the water and around the people and see my family.
Yeah, that would be great. Just sort of as we're winding down here, Andrew, at the end, I just got a couple of fun, quick questions for you. And, speaking of Croatia, when you're in Croatia, what's your favorite food to eat there?
Oh, my favorite food. It depends where I am. If I'm inland in Zagreb, something to do with meat, obviously, cevapi or something like that. But generally on the Mediterranean, on the coast, it would be, seafood generally. It's the staple of the Mediterranean diet. A lot of fish, a lot of potatoes, rice, that kind of stuff. So a good mix, just depending on kind of like anywhere in the world. It depends what region you're in. They're known for their food. I mean, Novalja was known for their cheese, Pag and then Pag. So I ate a lot of cheese there. That was what was very big, and a lot of lamb as well. They're known for that too. So it just depends where I am.
Yeah, actually, I just tried pashki sear for the first time on Christmas. I think it was just a few weeks ago. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, it's really nice. Yeah.
What's your favorite NBA moment from your career?
Favorite NBA moment? I mean, just winning a championship. I think you look at the select group of guys that have championship rings, and there's not many. When you correlate that to how many players have played in the NBA, so usually 15 guys win it a season, and usually the teams that win it, they'll repeat within that era, that decade. They'll win 2 or 3 at least. Like the Bulls, they won 6 out of the 90s, right? The Warriors have now won 4 over the last 10 plus years. So to be in that select group to win a championship is pretty special.
Nicest teammate that you've had?
Nicest teammate? Oh man, there's been a lot of nice teammates. But yeah, I mean, there's countless. I've had a lot of close friends. Luke Marbute was a really, really nice guy, awesome guy, just always smiling and happy. Harrison Barnes and Leandro Barbosa was the other one, Brazilian, just like always happy. You could never tell he had a bad day. So there's a number of guys, countless guys that were really, really cool that I still speak to this day. But yeah, they'd probably be the 3 that come to mind.
Okay, I got a final one for you here that I asked Dino Raja, and I'm curious if maybe you'll have the same answer. A player that you would least want to fight.
That I would least want to fight. Anyone substantially bigger than me. So I mean, Shaq is one guy that you probably, as soon as he gets his hands on you in a wrestle, you're in some trouble. So it's more of a duck and weave. He'd probably be the one that you want to stay away from, I'd assume.
Yeah, that's what Dino said too. That's why I was wondering.
Too big.
But you
gotta make sure you just bob and weave and just make sure he doesn't get his hands on you, because I think once he gets his hands on you, he's an absolute beast. So yeah, I got done by him a couple of times in the NBA where he had some good games against me, and there was just nothing you could do because he's just so big.
Jeez. But you also played against Yao, right? Yao Ming?
Yeah, was the other one. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'd consider fighting. He's a bit more mild mannered and stuff. I don't think he's a fighter. Never saw him throw a punch, but yeah, was tough as well, man. He was a big guy.
In terms of guarding, sorry, one last question. In terms of defense, because you were known for defense, known for blocking shots. Who was harder to block, Shaq or Yao?
Oh yeah, in Shaq, towards the end of his career, he lost a lot of his lift, so I got him a few times with some block shots. But Yao was 4 inches taller than Shaq and shot the ball above his head. So he was just a guy that you couldn't really. Once he got in a nice groove, it was very hard to stop. Now Shaq in his prime would have been a different story. In the 90s and early 2000s, he was unbelievable. You're not blocking much of his shots. But yeah, Yao was tough, man. It was a shame that his career was cut short by injury.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, as we're coming down here to the end of the podcast, I just want to thank you again, so much for coming on the All Things Croatia podcast and, talking to the diaspora and anyone else who's listening. It's really been a pleasure to hear about, your Croatian heritage and, your involvement in the community, and then of course your career and everything. I wish you the best of luck in the future. I'm excited, for you to come in June. That'll be awesome to be back in Croatia, and I'm sure you'll have a great time.
No worries. Thanks for having me.